As far as we can tell, every mammal, certainly dogs and humans, go through key developmental stages throughout their life, sometimes referred to as critical periods. An adequate amount of arousal, whether stressful or enjoyable, can have a lasting effect throughout the individual's life.
I could be a mess, stressed in yesterday. He don't care less, he sees me anyway. Yeah, he sees me anyway. My dog thinks I'm great, he thinks I'm number one. He never hates, even when I'm done.
Welcome to...
Sorry. Okay, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Welcome to this episode of Dog Leads with my dad, Steve Bishop. He is a certified dog trainer, a member of the Pet Professional Guild, and a Family Paws parent educator. He has a BA in psychology and a minor in sociology. Dad has been teaching group classes and private clients professionally for about 15 years. Every week he brings you a little bit of information to help improve your relationship with your dog, using science and sense. If you have questions or would like to suggest a topic, you can leave a comment or email him at bishopskatetraining@gmail.com. This episode is brought to you by It Goes Without Saying, What Our Dogs Are Trying to Tell Us. It will be presented by my dad on January 10th. This presentation will help you improve the relationship with your dog by teaching you their language. Pre-registration is required, and there will be a link in the description.
This topic comes from my cousin Kristen, who suggested a topic on senior dogs. I've expanded the topic to cover lifetime developments. So the first research on the development of dogs is credited to a 20-year study by John Paul Scott and John L. Fuller, and started in the 1940s, covered prenatal, neonatal, transition, and juvenile stages, and we'll get into that a little bit here. It has since expanded to include adulthood and seniorhood, and in humans there's a plethora of research on physical, mental, and moral development, but I'm going to focus mainly on Erik Erikson and Jean Piaget. What I'm going to be talking about used to be called critical periods because exposure to certain types of arousal could have a lasting effect on the rest of the person's or the dog's life. Because the behaviors were already well established by adulthood and seniorhood, these were not originally considered a critical period. However, we now know that this is not the case, and people and dogs are just as prone to behavior changes during these later stages in life. But we'll talk about those stages after reaching sexual maturity in part 2. So this episode is going to be very scientific. I'm hopefully going to be able to put it in a not so scientific-y way. Is that an actual word? But this is the kind of stuff that really excites me. So bear with me. I hope you find it informative. So human beings, while they're prenatal, which just means they haven't been born yet, at about 27 weeks, humans start to hear, they can start to taste, and their eyes start to develop. They can see, but they're basically colorblind at this point. Their eyes haven't fully developed. Dogs, however, don't go through this transition until about 2 to 4 weeks. So the hearing starts at about 3 to 4 weeks, and the eyes develop at 2 to 3 weeks. However, when they're born, they do have some sense of smell so that they can find the teats to suckle, and they can start feeling, so they find comfort in being around their litter mates just by touch. But for dogs, that socialization period doesn't really start until somewhere around 3 weeks, up to 12 weeks or so. With humans, they start socializing almost right away, and part of that has to do, I think, with their visual acuity, even though it's not fully developed yet. There have been experiments where a newborn baby will try to mimic simple facial expressions right after birth. So the humans are developing a little bit slower, but they are born kind of ready to go to a point, whereas the puppies need a little bit more time to get through those initial developmental stages. But things start to switch once we get up to that next developmental stage. Erickson calls it the trust versus mistrust, which goes from 0 to about a year and a half. This is where we see stranger danger between 6 months and 2.5 years, where dogs will go through what's been called fear period from about 8 to 10 weeks. Babies will begin to rely on themselves to influence the environment. Dogs, at about 6 to 8 weeks, they start approaching things that are unfamiliar. From 2 to 7, Piaget calls this the pre-operational stage. It's where babies begin to develop their fine motor skills. Dogs, on the other hand, are developing their fine motor skills during this socialization period, which again starts at about 3 weeks. And their fine motor skills will start to develop into adult-like levels at 3 to 9 weeks. At about 8 weeks, dogs will start going through this stable learning. They'll seek socialization, and exposure between 5 to 9 weeks can have a lasting effect. So things like herding dogs just 5 minutes a day with whatever animal they're going to be herding or protecting will create that bond between the dog and those animals. For people, this doesn't really start until about 7 to 12 years of age, or about when puberty hits or sexual maturity. Also during this pre-operational stage, Piaget describes it as people thinking the world revolves around them. Others see the world the same way they do. They have an inability to think through cause and effect. That concrete operational doesn't start until 7 to 12 years of age. That more adult-like motor skills. They understand that objects have permanence. If you cover something up, for kids younger, they don't understand that that object is still there, that it's permanent. 7 to 12, they also start to be able to perform mental operations and can consider cause and effect. If I do this, that will happen. For Erickson, this is the stage initiative versus guilt, which they begin to make decisions about the world around them, what they want to, what they want to eat. For example, I want Cheerios, I don't know, spaghetti or hot dogs or whatever, these kinds of decisions. One of the problems we see here, and we're going to get more into this at the end, is there is a danger in the parents or adults demanding the impossible from the kids. So sit still, make your bed, these types of things that they're just not capable of doing on their own. For puppies, the juvenile stage starts at about 12 weeks and ends when they reach sexual maturity, which is what we call adulthood. One of the problems with this is for humans, once they reach sexual maturity, 12, 13 years old, their brain is not fully developed until the age of 23. So in some ways, we need to kind of go back and look at these things. I think Erickson's competence versus inferiority, at least, goes from 7 to 12 or sexual maturity, but we might want to extend that up to that 22, 23 years of age when the brain is fully developed, because in these stages with people, they're building self-confidence, learning to deal with failure, honing those socialization skills. And anybody who has been a teenager knows there's still a lot of that going on even past puberty. Because with dogs, we can look at their development. We know what changes are taking place, but we don't know what thought processes are going on. There's some studies about which part of the brain is being activated in the presence of certain stimuli with dogs, so we have a pretty good idea of what they're going through, but we can't know what they're thinking. So is the dog self-confident? We can't really say for sure. Is the dog dealing with failure, mentally adjusting to that? Again, we can't really know for sure what they're thinking or how they're processing that. With dogs, we are just able to look at the antecedent, or what comes before the behavior, and then the consequence. and then make assumptions. So at this stage, competence versus inferiority, if the kids are building their self-confidence, dogs at this stage are gaining that self-confidence also, but they may have a growing fear of the unfamiliar if not properly socialized. Likewise, their adult motor skills are really developing at this stage, whereas they're honing their socialization skills. The dogs are starting to hone their communication skills. This is one of the things I've talked about before. We adopt dogs out when they're 8 weeks old because that's when the mother's starting to wean them and they are eating solid foods. They're going through that bonding stage, or they're seeking that socialization. However, it's not until around 12 weeks or so where the dogs learn those appropriate behaviors from their litter mates, biting too hard and jumping up and whining and these types of things. So I think it would be better if when we're adopting dogs, we waited until that 12 weeks of age so they have that exposure, and it'll hopefully just make it a little bit easier on the adopter because the puppy has learned these appropriate behaviors. So why do we talk about this, and why do I get so excited about it? As I mentioned, stimuli or arousal at these stages can have long-lasting effects. And the example I always give in my classes is Puck, who I've mentioned before. When he was going through these early developmental stages, particularly that first fear period at 8 to 10 weeks, he was severely abused. The best we can figure, my wife and I, just from the way he reacted, it was an older gentleman. Well, we know it was an older gentleman from the rescue that we got him from, but his behavior led us to believe that it was an older gentleman who wanted a dog to sit in his lap, and a puppy just isn't going to do that. It goes back to that danger in demanding something that the puppy in this case, or the kid, is not capable of. We think he would sit there and would brush Puck, and if he wiggled, if he moved, if he tried to get away, he got smacked with the brush. We were able to get him over a lot of this stuff, and he was part Lhasa Apso, so we had to brush him, but we kind of mitigated that by keeping his hair short and minimal exposure to the brush, and then we started to desensitize him to the brush and the brushing. But putting this in a context with children helps us to understand what the dog is going through at these different stages. At the same time, I enjoy working with and studying children and puppies mainly, but dogs in general. My primary focus was development and communication, particularly nonverbal communication. I think my teachers got sick of every paper I had reference to dogs and puppies and studies that were done on them, but I always made that correlation between what I was studying or what I was writing the paper on correlated with children, how we could use that to understand their development and their learning. Hopefully you found this interesting. Next week I'll be doing adulthood and seniorhood. I also wanted to mention I do have a presentation coming up next week, January 10th, 2026. The title of the presentation is It Goes Without Saying What Our Dogs Are Trying to Tell Us, where I go over dog body language and communication styles. Just for the average dog owner, somebody who just wants to be able to communicate a little bit better with their dog and understand what the dog is trying to tell them. So if you're interested, I will leave a link in the description. Pre-registration is required for that, so you'll need to register in the next couple of days. The other thing I wanted to mention is I set up a website yesterday. It's not totally complete. There's some tweaking I want to do, but all the information is there about the different projects that I have going on, about my training, etc. So if you want to check that out, I will take any critiques. Just be nice, be constructive, and let me know what you think. And I'll leave a link to that in the description also. As always, if you have any topics you'd like to hear me talk about, you can leave a comment or you can email me at bishopsgatetraining@gmail.com, and we'll continue this discussion next week.